start with mild stress and it stays for a long time, becomes a little bit more chronic stress, becomes anxiety, and at a certain point when it overwhelms the normal coping mechanisms of the nervous system, then we would say it becomes trauma.
I just did not want to speak about the traumatic event, but I knew that, for example, experiencing TRE, I went into it feeling a little bit scared because I thought, ooh, the body's shaking. I don't know if I can handle that. But it was so gentle.
Yeah.
And it was so not what I thought when I thought of tremors and shaking.
If you see somebody shaking in society, you will say they're weak, they're vulnerable, they're insecure, they're frightened. There's absolutely no positive narrative they're releasing stress. How wonderful is that? And even in our societies, what we would do in many cultures, you have that stressor, you start to get anxious, you start to shake. First thing many people do is have a drink of alcohol to calm the nerves down.
Or is it to numb?
Or to numb it out. Exactly right. Exactly what they're doing. Why would we numb out something that organically is evoked from the human organism that knows how to survive life on the planet?
Hello, and welcome to Season 3 of Mindful Makers. I am so excited to be back with you for yet another season filled with insightful, thought-provoking conversations that will hopefully inspire, spark curiosity, and create moments of stillness and reflection wherever you're listening from. To everyone tuning in from over 42 countries, and especially those joining for the first time, I'm Sahar, your host for the show. I'm an experiential brand specialist helping people tell their stories in impactful and meaningful ways. You can learn more about my work at sorsha.com. This season, I'll be exploring some new themes such as trauma and anxiety release, somatic therapies, and holistic practices, as well as meeting more creators and entrepreneurs who use the mind, body, and spirit to enrich people's lives as well as their own. As always with the show, they share a common drive to make meaningful, positive impacts through mindful practices. And today, I am so honored, to welcome Dr. David Berceli, an internationally renowned trauma specialist, psychotherapist, and creator of tension and trauma releasing exercises, or TRE. With over 20 years of experience in trauma recovery, stress relief, and conflict resolution, he developed TRE as a method to help release deep-seated tension through the body's natural shaking mechanism. He's worked in conflict zones and areas affected by natural disasters from the Middle East to Africa to Asia and beyond. He's also shared his insights through 3 books, and they've been translated into 13 languages, which shows just how deeply this work resonates with a global audience. And what I admire about his background is that he combines qualifications in therapeutic bodywork with a profound understanding of trauma's social, cultural, and physiological dimensions. And this approach has allowed him to support diverse communities, including emergency responders, military personnel, and everyday individuals who are on the journey to reclaiming their well-being. So without further ado, Dr. Berceli, welcome to the show.
What a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
I feel honored, but incredibly grateful because this is a very rare moment in time where you're only in town for a few days. You don't actually live here.
Yeah, I'm just passing through. So this really is delightful that we managed to get this to schedule like this.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Full disclosure, I mean, I feel all my parts are very excited in the room at the moment, and I feel a little bit starstruck as well because you were recently on a show with Dr. Andrew Weil, who I also adore and admire. So I'm feeling like, wow, there's a lot of great presence in the room right now. Thank you.
You're very welcome. He's a great person, and I teach this at his program in the University of Arizona.
Amazing.
And so we have a lot of fun together too. I like him very much.
Oh, that's great. I feel very honored. Thank you. So before we get into the specifics of your work, I'd like to share a little bit about you with our listeners because I'm conscious that we have very different listeners from all over the world with different knowledge of what trauma is. And you speak fluent Arabic, if I'm not wrong.
Well, I'll struggle with the word fluent, but fairly fluent, yes.
Right. And you've got your master's in Arabic and Islamic studies, theology, and PhD in social work.
Yes.
So quite a breadth of knowledge and experience under your belts, what was your first interest in these areas? What sparked your interest in Arabic, in the region, and this kind of study?
Well, I was working with a nonprofit organization, and they sent me to the Middle East to actually just work with the general population there. And I noticed the stressors and the everyday lives. And since I was a clinical social worker, it was like, well, how would I help these people when I only have a clinical background from the United States? It doesn't really fit the Arab culture. And as I studied the language more and then studied Islam more, I realized, okay, there's a way into this culture about helping them understand stress, tension, anxiety, and trauma from their cultural perspective. So I really had a strong investment in learning the language so I could first begin speaking about it. Then I found that the speaking was inadequate, which then led me into more body-based approach, which seemed to be more applicable to the culture and to the region here.
Really interesting. And from that moment in time, where did your interest in trauma recovery and the mind-body connection start to emerge?
One of the countries in the Middle East I lived in, because I lived in several, but when I was living in Lebanon, and it was during a time of extreme violence there, and I was experiencing trauma myself and watching it in the population. And it was my first understanding that clinical therapy is not what's needed here. We need to help this audience or this population of people figure out how to help themselves, because now I'm looking at an entire nation of traumatized people rather than just a few individuals. So clinical individual therapy wouldn't work. How do I help mothers? How do I help soldiers? How do I help students? Larger populations of people find a way to help themselves from healing or at least reducing the effects of the trauma from war.
So that's when you started to work on the ground in Lebanon
Yes.
and start to develop your work even
Yes.
further when it came to trauma related to body
Exactly.
specifically.
Now, what's interesting when you say I was on the ground, what was happening was I was experiencing the same thing that the population I was living with was experiencing. And I noticed two things there that were very important, which helped produce trauma releasing exercises. One is that when we would hear a loud sound, either shooting would start or there would be a missile or tank fire or something, and it surprised us because you could just be in the streets and it happened automatically. We would all go into this tense freeze response, and what it did was it pulled us forward in what's called the fetal response. What fascinated me was that even though we were from multiple countries, every human body did it. And it was like, I'm seeing something that goes below culture and language or religion or anything. I'm seeing the human organism and how it's genetically encoded to protect itself during stressful or traumatic events. And I thought that fascinated me. And two things about it fascinated me. One is, what part of the brain neurologically produces such a fast reaction like that? A startle response, would call it in English. And it's like, what part of the brain does that? It can't be what's called the prefrontal cortex, where the ego is. That would be too slow. You don't think about that.
Yeah.
You have an instinct response. Well, that means it has to be what we call subcortical, or below the ego, if you will. So primitive parts of the brain that control heart rate and blood pressure and breathing.
Yeah.
That's where the startle
The
response is.
involuntary part of your body that you're not in
Exactly.
control of. It's not a conscious reaction.
So now I'm seeing, okay, there's an involuntary part of the brain that's designed to protect us. So the second question became naturally, well, what muscle pattern is attached to that? Because it's a whole group of muscles are attached to that could produce such a quick response like that. And so it's like, it's a primitive part of the brain that has a very specific location in very specific muscles to produce a fetal response in every human being on the planet.
Yeah.
That's our protective mechanism. We're genetically designed with that.
Yeah, we crouch down, we curl up into a ball. It's even part of our language. I just felt like curling up into a ball.
Exactly right.
I felt like expanding my arms and pushing my chest out. You know,
Right.
That's not the reaction you get to something that's scary.
And what I loved about it is no one ever made a mistake. We always ended up in this
the same
fetal
position.
response,
Yeah.
curling up into a ball, instinctually and just that quick. It fascinated me.
Trauma's become quite a buzzword in society at the moment. I mean, I even see memes. My friends send me memes about it on Instagram and social media, especially ones that of people dancing and people like realizing that trauma's stored in the hips and doing all sorts of extreme things to kind of get rid of it and sort
Right.
of cleanse themselves of it. So I can see that it really is a sign of the times, but also we're living through, I mean, unprecedented peaks of PTSD, stress, anxiety, heartbreak and conflict and despair in the world. And I read that around 70% of the world's population at any given time in their lives will experience a traumatic event. But what fascinated me about that was that this is called, according to the World Health Organization, that only 5.6% of that 70% will go on to develop PTSD. However, it's currently estimated that 4% of the total world's population will experience PTSD right now. And that puts the number, if I remember correctly, at 308 million people. So it sounds small, but it's not. Do you agree with these stats from your experience? Because I know sometimes stats can be a little bit dissociating.
Right. Well, I think the stats are probably pretty honest. However, what we're learning as the field of trauma grows is that we have what we call trauma with a small t and trauma with a big T.
Okay.
Okay. And trauma could be one episode, or it could be over a 4 or 5 year period. What if your mother and father are experiencing tremendous hardship financially, as an example? So they're living under tremendous stress, and you're a teenager. You can feel their stress, but they don't talk to you about it. But it continues over a long period of time. So now it's no longer a stressor. It's become trauma with a small t.
Okay.
It continues to affect your life. Even after the event is over, you're still replicating the pattern,
The sensation.
a sensation of having lived under that stressor. And that's different than trauma with a big T, like I talked about, if you're living in a situation where there's political violence, as an example, or natural disasters would be a big trauma, an earthquake or volcano eruption, that sort of thing. So that could be just a moment. Now, the other thing to sort of address what you're talking about is they've also recognized that the less safety that is available, the more the experience will be traumatizing. So as an example, if you're a child and your family goes through something, but you have mommy and daddy there holding and protecting you, that will have less of a traumatic effect on you than if they are not available. And so when safety is not there, the sensation of the trauma experience becomes much more impactful on us.
That also plays out in many different ways. So for a lot of people, it could be the sense of community. It could be the sense of sharing, togetherness.
Yes.
Other people, it would be having an outlet to go and actually talk about it with communities, or I don't know, somatic body work.
That's exactly right.
It's about the resources that you have to your fingertips to be able to handle it.
Exactly. And so when you're in countries that are experiencing political violence at the moment, those resources are less.
Yeah.
And so therefore the traumatic experiences will grow. But after that, those events are over, if they can reach out to these other resources, then they start to reduce the effects of the traumatic experiences.
I think it's really important, actually, at this point in our discussion to help us differentiate, and perhaps, I know you're the right person actually for this, to help us differentiate between what we identify as trauma, which you've discussed, but also stress and chronic anxiety that builds up over time, because they also affect our nervous system in profound ways, but not necessarily the way that trauma does. Could you help me unpack that?
If you think of it maybe on a scale, you start with mild stress and it stays for a long time, becomes a little bit more chronic stress, becomes anxiety, and at a certain point when it overwhelms the normal coping mechanisms of the nervous system, then we would say it becomes trauma.
Okay.
When that becomes overwhelmed. And that's a matter of shifting different parts of the nervous system. Stephen Porges would talk about the polyvagal nerve as an example. And so there's two branches of the polyvagal nervous system. And at a certain point, if you think of a bell curve, when you cannot handle the stressor, a different branch of the polyvagal nerve will activate. And that's what we call the dissociative numbing.
The dorsal.
The dorsal vagal, exactly right, nerve. And then that's when you consider, okay, this was traumatizing, because the dorsal vagal nerve only activates when it's absolutely essential, when the other nervous systems, the ventral vagal and the sympathetic nervous system, were no longer effective. Dorsal vagal activates, and now you're talking about trauma.
Okay, so to break it down, basically, when we're chilled out and we're nice and happy, we're in a ventral state, and we can handle things. Our nervous system is calm, and what life throws at us, we can take in our stride. It stresses us out, but we bounce back into that space. So we need stresses sometimes. I mean, when I go to my rebounder class, my aura ring tells me I'm in stress, but then I come down into a relaxed state again afterwards. But that's physiological stress. It's different.
Yeah.
And then there's the fight or flight, which you mentioned as the sympathetic response.
Exactly.
And that's kind of when we go into stress modes that can end up chronic, right?
Yeah. If we can get out of the stressor or the danger by using those, then we don't go into a dorsal vagal
which
response.
is essentially freeze.
Yes,
right?
exactly
and that's
right.
the freeze state where we stay there for a while and we can't move.
That's when we
forward.
Yes. And some of that becomes sort of in the background. We don't even know that we're there. If you think of freeze or numbing or dissociation, and that's not clinical dissociation that I don't know where I am in my room. It's dissociation that I don't feel what's going on in me. But in the background, there's this high nervous reaction going on. I feel anxious inside, but I actually kind of don't feel it externally.
You might be on autopilot.
Exactly right.
Yeah, just going through the motions. I love that you mentioned Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, actually, because I was going to ask you, sometimes when I'm sitting with somebody that I deeply care about and I'm emotionally invested in, and they're telling me a story about something that's going on in their lives that's stressing them out or causing them upset, and they want my help. As they're telling me the story, I feel my core suddenly, it used to happen more before, but not so much now that I'm working a lot on my nervous system, but my core would shake as I was trying to respond to them in a way that helps them and lifts them up, almost like I was giving a part of myself to raise the energy.
Right.
Is that connected in some way to this co-regulation of nervous systems that Stephen Porges talks about?
That's precisely what it is. That's how we as a species sort of survive. We co-regulate through our nervous systems. And what's very interesting is the more we recognize this, the more we realize that when somebody says, well, I'm intuiting something, which we used to dismiss intuition. No, your nervous system is regulating towards somebody else, and that you're having a reaction. Your reaction, if you calm down, can actually calm down the nervous system of a colleague or friend.
Yeah.
We can actually affect each other's nervous systems, which we really know in a social way.
Yeah.
You feel comfortable with somebody, you don't feel comfortable with somebody.
100%.
You get that through nervous system interaction, not through some vague intuition.
Yeah,
literally,
absolutely.
we're co-regulating species.
And I have the science, for the skeptics out there, I have the science to back that. So I wear this wonderful aura ring that tracks my stress, relaxed, restored, and engaged states through various biometrics, biodata. And I recently spent some time with a dear friend of mine who was passing through on her way to India. and her nervous system is, she's always very relaxed. She's always very embodied. And within minutes of being around her, my metric would drop into restored and stay there for most of the day. And I've had about 3 restorative days on my app in a row. And that was incredibly telling because I spent most of the time with her.
Yeah, perfect.
There you go. That's the science.
I agree,
Can't argue with that. Okay, so now I'd like to start unpacking the method of your wonderful TRE exercises. Could you tell us a little bit about, when I experienced it back in May, it was unlike anything I'd experienced before. And to anyone listening, I would say, seeing is not believing here. Experiencing is believing.
Thank you. Yes.
Please go ahead and tell us about how it works.
We're going to pick up with what you had just said when you were with a friend who was talking about a difficult situation. In your gut or in your belly, you could feel something shaking or vibrating. Okay, that's our nervous system, which people say have butterflies in my stomach as an example. Yes, you do. Something's starting to move or activate. So I'm going to take you to the second part of this story of how I ended up developing this technique. Is I was then later on in Sudan, and I was in a bomb shelter, and we were being bombed, and I had 2 little children, and they were sitting on my lap, and they were young boys, about 2 years old, and they were facing each other, so I had my hand on their backs. And I could feel in my hand that they were tremoring in terror. It was almost like shivering in the cold. They were just tremoring. And I found it fascinating that I could feel this. And I looked around the room, and all the young children were shaking freely. But when they got to be about 11, 12, or 13, I could see that they were shaking and trying to control it or stop it. And none of the adults were shaking at all.
Oh my God, that makes me want to cry.
Exactly. It fascinated me. So when I was done, we got out of the bomb shelter, I asked the adults, I said, do you ever shake like the children do? And they said, no, we don't want them to think we're afraid. And it fascinated me because I thought, oh my God, with the children, I saw a natural, alive, living organism activating its survival mechanism, whereas adults had learned how to stop the mechanism, and now they no longer use their natural survival skills that are built into the human body. And I equate it with crying. If a 2-year-old falls and hurts their knee, they'll cry freely. If you have an 11-year-old who falls and hurts their knee, they might want to cry, but they hold it back. And you can, as an adult, you can fall and break your knee and you won't even cry. So why do we train ourselves out of organic responses that the human organism obviously is designed to have for specific purposes? And so that shaking mechanism is one of them.
Do you think that that happens because, obviously you said that the adults don't want the children to know that they're afraid, but also do you think society dictates that we cover up raw emotion as a sign of weakness in general?
Look what happens. If you see somebody shaking in society, you'll say they're weak, they're vulnerable, they're insecure, they're frightened. There's absolutely no positive narrative to, oh, they're releasing stress. How wonderful is that? See? Yeah. And even in our societies, what we would do in many cultures, you have that stressor, you start to get anxious, you start to shake. First thing many people do is have a drink of alcohol to calm the nerves down.
Or is it to numb?
Or to numb it out. Exactly right. Exactly what they're doing. Why would we numb out something that organically is evoked from the human organism that knows how to survive life on the planet?
Yeah.
So we have to shift the narrative.
We have to shift the narrative. So looking at the technique itself and the science behind it, for listeners who aren't, I guess, familiar with TRE, can you talk me through the steps of how you would guide somebody through this exercise, please?
So it's very simple. If you think of that fetal response that we just spoke of a little bit ago, that pulls the body forward into a ball. You roll up into a ball. Well, if I wanted to introduce safety into the human organism or into the structure, I would do the opposite. I would, the exercise is that you lay on the floor and you put the bottoms of your feet together, you open your knees, and you pick your pelvis up. So you're now extending the body.
Like an arc.
Like an arc.
Is that the bridge pose?
It's like the bridge pose in yoga, exactly like. So you're extending the body like that, suggesting now I'm safe, see, which is the opposite of the fetal response. And so if you hold that posture for about a minute or so, then the body will start to let go of its chronic holding pattern. Then you set the pelvis down, and then, as you know, the only thing you do is you just slowly keep closing the knees, and the tremor response activates in the adductors, which are on the inside of the leg. And then they will, by themselves, start to journey their way through your structure, looking for all these tight patterns that it no longer needs or wants, and that we're even unconscious that we even have them anymore. And it just starts to, in a sense, dissolve them by itself. We are a self-regulating organism. Our body knows both how to contract to protect itself, and it knows how to release the contraction. But from what I see, it needs this tremor mechanism for the deep release that's created and may be held on chronically. And all we do is we give it that mechanism back, and it knows exactly how to use it, what to use it for, and it does it remarkably effectively.
It sounds like a breath of fresh air, actually, because I've been exploring a lot of ways of regulating the nervous system the past few years, looking at different therapeutic modalities, body work. People that know me very well know that I love 5 rhythms because of this. I love dancing. I love even the chaos rhythm in 5 rhythm, where I just literally I shake. But I'm quite conscious that those modalities have a degree of cognitive connection to them, let's say, where even though I try to get the mind out of the way, the mind does come and play back in on its own way and say, maybe move here or do that. Decisions are made in the space. Or CBT, for example. CBT I think has, and that's cognitive behavioral therapy for those of you who are curious, talking therapies, they help behavioral patterns and shift them in certain ways through the power of speech. But I feel they can only get so far. There are certain things that you need to get out of your body's way of. And this work does that, I believe.
Yeah, well, it does 2 things from what you're talking about. One is when we activate the shaking mechanism in the body, which is the nervous system, literally it works itself through the structure. You could watch TV, read a book, listen to music, because now we're no longer using the cognitive parts of the brain. We're using those primitive parts that we spoke of earlier. So the body knows how to do that by itself. And so that's the one thing. So we're going below consciousness. So we're getting out of ego and controlling behaviors, and the body is using its own mechanism in its way that it's designed to do. So that's the first thing. The other thing, because I do cognitive behavioral therapy as well, what I realized, and this was a lot with working with soldiers, I've worked with thousands of soldiers in many different countries around the world. And what I realized is that trauma in our bodies is a neurophysiological pattern. It is not one or the other. You don't just do cognitive therapy. You don't just do body work. It's when the 2 of those come together that the healing actually occurs. And so we have separated them in our cultural ways, where you either go do body work or you don't go do counseling. But the healing actually occurs when the body pulls the 2 of them together.
I love
so
that.
It's a neurophysiological experience. But what's good about it is because the nervous system is a dual pathway. I can go from the body to the brain, and I can go from the brain to the body, meaning I can do cognitive therapy with you, but it's when it starts to affect your body that the healing will occur. Or I can do body therapy, and when it connects to the psycho-emotional state is when the healing will occur. So it's pulling the 2 together. That's how the organism heals.
That makes sense. So I've done EMDR a few times as well, which helped me incredibly. But always at the end of each session, we do a body scan to see if the feeling is still somewhere in the body.
Exactly right. And so we're learning both from each of those different fields are coming together. Learning, okay, we need to be more aware of the connectivity that's occurring. I mean, that's what Bessel van der Kolk's work is doing so well.
Yeah.
It's like, no, let's connect the two. He made a statement that destroyed or really upset the cognitive behavioral therapy world when he said, you're not going to heal trauma without body work.
I love disruptors.
Yes,
Shout
he
out
did
to
a very
Bessel
good
van der
job
Kolk.
at disrupting us. Yes.
Coming on to Bessel's work, actually, because I know that a lot of people in listening right now will start to think of his book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is, crazy and incredible in its own ways. A hard read for some who are not very in tune with the more academic side of things. But I think the message in there really essentially is how he emphasizes that trauma is encoded in the body and the importance, like you said, of body-centered therapies and healing. As you mentioned, what I'm deciphering from that is that he talks a lot about EMDR, yoga, breath work as ways to release the body from trauma. But what you're saying also is that it's the combination. It's not just one modality that helps this. It's multiple things. Am I getting it?
Yes, that's what I think. Because if we just look at ourselves in a more primitive manner, I keep saying we're kind of like a complex amoeba. That's all. We're just a complicated amoeba, but it pulsates with aliveness. And we've separated the brain from the body in order to study them better. But the organism itself in which we're living has no idea we've separated it because it both experiences the traumatic event as a neurophysiological experience, and it heals it as a neurophysiological experience. There's no separation in both the way it takes up the experience and the way it releases or recovers from the experience. It's one living organism. And that's the paradigm that we have to think of when we're trying to help people recover from trauma or even stress, tensions, and anxieties. You're a living organism, and all of you has been affected. So let's use the modalities that work for you right now, which may change in 2 months because you will use that modality, which will change you to say, oh, a different modality now is more effective for where I am in my recovery process.
I love that. It provides a sense of hope and I think openness as well, because it helps us see that there is not one size that fits all in the journey to healing, and our evolution as through our own individual journeys will show up in ways that guide us to different things that resonate at the time and can help us. So when we approach it from a very universal perspective, we can see that there's so many different ways to go about it.
Yes.
And it's about catering to the multitude aspects of us as complex human beings.
Yes, I love that. We're complex human beings, and all these people have developed different modalities, all simply saw the complex human from different perspectives. And so if we allow all of those perspectives to be available, we get a chance to even say within ourselves, well, my perspective is this today, but if I do a certain modality for a month or 2 months or whatever, my perspective of where I am might completely change.
Shift.
And then I change the modality. And then we allow ourselves to say, yes, I do have the freedom to follow my organism as it guides me into what it needs next for its complete healing process.
I'm thinking and reflecting back to a lot of things that I can speak of from personal experience. And I remember there were times in my journey where I just did not want to speak about the traumatic event. I could not go there. I did not want to relive it. It was not interesting to me, and nor did my nervous system want that. I had to respect where my nervous system was in that space and hold it lightly. But I knew that, for example, experiencing TRE, I went into it feeling a little bit scared because I thought, ooh, the body's shaking. I don't know if I can handle that. But it was so gentle.
Yeah.
And it was so not what I thought when I thought of tremors and shaking. I thought I'd have to, again, cognitively make myself shake, which sounded exhausting.
Yeah, exactly.
But this it was incredibly gentle. And then through other work, I am now able to speak about it, and I'm in a space where I've evolved through that journey, and perhaps other things can come to the surface, but I couldn't force it, and it didn't have to be methodical.
That's so perfect. What I think I've discovered, or many people have seen, is that when people come and they want to do trauma healing, they come from one of three perspectives. I only want to do body work. I don't want to talk. I only want to talk because I'm afraid to do body work.
Yeah.
Or the other one is some sort of what I call belief system.
Right.
It's like the life doesn't make sense. I don't like life anymore. Where does God or Yahweh or Buddha or whatever their belief system is, where does that fit in? Because a lot of people will change their broader approach to being human and being on the planet and having these experiences. I let them start from wherever they are, but eventually all three of those somehow get connected. But like you said, if somebody comes and says, I don't want to talk about it, that just triggers me. And I say, okay, well, let's not talk about it and let's do some body work. And like you said, at least this technique that I teach, it can be very mild and gentle, almost inviting the organism to just relax into yourself, let go a little bit. We'll be gentle with you, meaning the body knows how to gently nurture itself back into aliveness. And in that process, it will become easier to then cognitively begin to discuss what might be traumatizing.
I'm curious to know, because you've worked with thousands and helped thousands and thousands of people with TRE personally, but also through the trainers that have qualified with the course. Have you ever come across someone who simply can't shake?
I love that question, and I wish I would someday. But no, I have not found anybody who does not shake. The reason I think that is we're genetically encoded to do it. Now, I have some people who have difficulty accessing the shaking, and that usually is because there's an unconscious psycho-emotional resistance to it, not because the human organism can't do it. And so then I gently have to play with that psycho-emotional resistance, but the human body actually tremors quite easily.
So that person might require a little bit more assistance, a little bit more guidance, a little bit more time.
What they really require is time and safety. Once they discover their safety, like you said, I don't know if I want to shake. That sounds really odd, and I don't want to cognitively have to do this, it'll exhaust me. But once the body itself starts to do it, the body does the convincing to the psycho-emotional part of the person that says, no, we're safe and this is good. And finally, the ego will finally give in and say, yeah, it's working, I like it. And then the cognitive aspect is much easier to access.
I remember having quite a giggle, actually, when I started to shake, because I was just like, what is going on? Like, how is this? It's just got a life of its own. My body, I kept looking at my hips going, how?
Everybody does that thing. They'll pick up their head and look at their body and say, how is it doing that? Which makes me laugh too, because I think, just think we could have been doing this our entire life.
Seriously.
And here you are as an adult looking at yourself saying, how does my body do this? And you're genetically encoded to do it. It's like, why didn't I know of this genetic encoding?
I know. I mean, don't get me started on the educational system, but I do really feel like that needs to be part of it.
Exactly, yes.
What's also come to me is I'm seeing a commonality between, you mentioned the essence of trauma does get locked in our hips and the pelvic region from a survival mechanism, I guess, but also looking at the world of yoga and the chakra system, the root chakra and the sacral chakra associated with stability, grounding, sexual function, depression, creativity. Those are the areas that really, I guess, get activated or mobilized when we experience stress and anxiety in one way or the other. And then I know that in Reiki, the hara is the center of our energy that we attune into when we're going to start energy work. Do you think there has to be something there. It can't be that there are these things randomly on their own. What is that?
Okay, so let me start first anatomically. to create the fetal response, we need what's called the psoas muscle. The psoas muscle goes from the top of the leg, goes through the pelvis into the front of the spinal column, all 5 lumbar vertebrae. So it's in the front of the body. That squeezes tight. It's actually called the fight or flight muscle. You use it when you're running from something, or you're ducking or hiding. That muscle contracts. There are 2 of them on both sides of the spine. So that runs through the area that you're talking about, the first, second chakra, or the hara. What's very interesting, and so that fits in what I call belief system, the realm of belief system, because I want people to know they can still tremor and use this technique. They don't have to believe in chakras. They don't have to believe in hara or anything like that. It's still anatomical and energetic. That we are an energy source. Physics has already proven that. But here's what's interesting about it. When I went to China, and I was working at the National Institute of Chinese Medicine, they asked me to come and present this because they heard about me and wanted to know what this was like. So there were about 12 medical doctors, all from different branches of Chinese medicine. They did the exercises, and one of the doctors sat up with the greatest smile, and he said, "You found a Western way to move chi." And that was just the most delightful thing, because he took what I did, and I never called it moving chi. He interpreted it according to his belief system.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, I'm going to use this. This is wonderful," he said.
I love that.
So he interpreted it so that it fits into his narrative and his paradigm.
Sure.
And so if people believe in chakras or kundalini or the hara, I say, yes, follow that belief system. But if you don't believe in it, it's neuroanatomical.
Anyway, yeah.
And you follow that. So yes, you're
Interesting.
right about that. But I allow people to take it up in their way, because I believe belief system and understanding or having your belief system is part of the way that you heal yourself through trauma.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I offer them to take it up that way.
In a way that resonates with you, in a way
Exactly.
that speaks your language, that your body responds to, because you could try to believe something, but if your body's not feeling it, then it's not really your
Yeah,
bag,
exactly
you know?
right. You're not owning it from the depth of
So
yourself.
there's no point forcing yourself.
Exactly right. It won't work.
During the show, I always like to unpack a little bit of what's in our guests' metaphorical toolboxes. I love a metaphorical toolbox.
Okay.
So I know that you've worked, obviously, in the most challenging environments, such as war-torn regions and areas that have been impacted by natural disasters. How have you personally navigated the emotional and mental toll that comes with that high-stress situation post TRE? You know, what's in your toolbox?
It's kind of interesting because I reflect on that often, because I still go into war zones and natural disaster areas. But I remember many years ago, after I first discovered or figured out this TRE, this trauma releasing technique, and this is post-war, so I had to go through a lot of my own recovery, both clinical cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as many different body modalities.
Right.
So I did my own work. It took about 5 years to get through all of that.
Oh, wow.
Then I went back into a war zone, and I realized, oh, I'm going to survive. I can handle this. Somehow inside me, I knew that I was designed to experience trauma. I think the human organism or the human species is designed to experience, endure it, survive it, and what I've learned is evolve from it. So there's something about, I don't look to go into these zones, but if I go there, I know that I will go through every one of those phases. And at the end, because I still use TRE or cognitive behavioral therapy, or I'll get a massage or whatever I need, I know that something is evolving in me as a species, because I have endured and survived these life-challenging events. And I, oddly enough, and I mean this in sort of a humble way, I feel more powerful from it. Not powerful in a dominating way, but more powerful as a human species.
Yeah.
because I've gone through this many, many times, and I'm still alive, and I still love, and I still believe in humanity,
Yeah.
even though I've experienced many things that would cause a person not to believe in it.
Oh, I felt that in my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still a fascinating experience. At the age of 70, I'm still doing it, and I'm still amazed and mesmerized that this continues to happen.
That's beautiful. You fine-tuned your connection to your body's needs, and you're able to meet that as it comes along in the journey. So you said whether it's tremoring or it's CBT or getting a massage, I think sometimes we associate something like a massage with a luxury or something that's pampering rather than something that is serving in a way to heal.
Right. Yeah, I think what happened, well, because I have all these different backgrounds academically and experientially, I'm much more refined at saying, oh, I know what I need.
Yeah.
This experience was tough today. And even in a war zone or even in a natural disaster area, I can say, all right, I can get somebody who can help me with this immediately so that I don't carry it long term until after I leave the area. I can actually do some of the healing right within the zone itself.
Yeah, you touched on a really important point, which is asking for help.
Yes, exactly right.
Knowing when to ask for help and not having to do everything on your own.
Yeah.
According to the World Health Organization, among people who have experienced war or other conflict in the previous 10 years, 1 in 5, so that's 22%, will have depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia. And I know that you've helped diverse communities. We talked about emergency responders. You mentioned military personnel and everyday individuals to find this sense of resilience and strength through TRE. But what do you think is the most important lesson that we can all learn about resilience and healing?
It's very interesting when you talk about that. When we're going to go back to the dorsal vagal response, which is that freeze. Dissociative response.
Yeah.
So when you talk about bipolar or dissociation or depression, what's really happening is they're vacillating between the dorsal vagal state and the sympathetic state. They're going in and out of both of those. So it looks like it's a bipolar experience. I'm either numb or I'm enraged. And they're vacillating between that. When a person is in those states, that's when their body is actually trying to heal. So if they could see that vacillation as the body's trying to come back alive, it's trying to come out of dorsal, but it's experiencing what it just went into prior to the dissociative response. So it's this high, intense anxiety, and then it flipped into numbness. But when it's going to heal, it's going to come back out again, see? And so it's going back and forth. When it's vacillating like that, it's like, I want to tell the client, now you're healing. Your body's trying to bring you back down to a ventral vagal response, coming out of that. And so if they could keep in the image, I'm not sick, I'm not damaged in those moments, this is my body actually trying to heal. Unfortunately, there's your breath, unfortunately, that's what it has to go through to complete the healing process.
So for the listeners who aren't watching this on video, as Dr. Berceli was just describing that, I took this really big, deep, sort of lung-filled breath in and almost sighed out. And it was almost like his words were creating this space of deep compassion and understanding for what we go through in our moment of healing. And I think that's really important. You touched on that because I felt that in my body, that when we're experiencing these what seem like really awful moments in our lives, the compassion and kindness that we show ourselves is actually the most important thing. Not saying like, I'm broken, what's wrong with me?
Right.
How do I fix this? Where's the elixir to solve this?
Right.
It's more like, this is my journey of healing and it's happening.
That's the hardest piece, and that's the one I want to get to people most, is when you're going through those difficult movements between emotions and you feel stuck, that is literally the time that your body is trying to heal. It's like it's on your side.
Yeah.
So don't think that you're lost. That's precisely the opposite. You're not lost. The body's saying, I'm right here, and I'm trying to get us back down to this ventral vagal response.
Yeah.
Hang out with me. I'm trying to get there. And it's like excited. So if we could really get people to get that, and I know it's hard, those are the times it's most difficult. But I have to laugh because when you took the deep breath, right there is what I believe is that your body knew that I was seeing it. See, it heard, oh, he sees me. He knows me.
Yeah, it was reacting to you.
Exactly right. Yes.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because it really did come from a deep space of relaxation.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm pretty sure if I look at my aura data, my ring data later, it's going to show that I just dropped into
absolutely
a relaxed
it will.
state.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So looking ahead, sort of future planning, where do you see the future of trauma recovery and techniques like TRE going? Are there any exciting developments happening out there? Are there any new areas of focus that are coming into your perspective, particularly about what's going on in the world right now?
Yeah, I think the direction that trauma recovery is moving in, which I really support and encourage, is a lot of self-help communal techniques. We can no longer rely on just cognitive behavioral therapy or massage or these places where people go as individuals. We must be teaching parents or partners how to help each other. Then how do they help their children? How do families help each other? How do these support groups, communities help each other? We've got to think of resolving trauma as a species in a large scale. And because that's how trauma is affecting this planet right now, whether it's due to violence, human-made violence, or natural violence of the planet. We have hundreds of millions of people who are traumatized. That means we have the responsibility and the possibility of figuring out how do we get hundreds of millions of people to heal their trauma. If we do that, this is my perspective, we will see the evolution of our species learning how to live on this planet in the environment in which we live, and we will learn how to live more harmoniously.
That's beautiful. I can see how it would really change communities, the power of connection, and even bring out curiosity in the biggest of skeptics.
Yes.
When you take that kind of approach. It's very gentle, it's very inclusive and educational. I think the future does have we have a responsibility to educate ourselves so that we can be better and show up as better versions of ourselves.
My feeling is if trauma is part of the very nature of living on planet Earth, so that means the human species should expect that it will experience it in some degree or another, in some way or another. If that's part of the nature of being on this planet, then that means we are designed to be able to experience that. And like I said, I think not only just survive it, but we're actually designed to evolve as a species from it. So I'm not saying we should all be excited that we're traumatized, but I am saying that we should keep in our mind that if I've experienced trauma, or when I do, which I will, I'm sure, in my future, there's something in that will be evolutionary for me to help me grow deeper in my own humanity.
Wow, that's so powerful and beautiful and profound. What's one final piece of advice you would give anyone who's experiencing or might be struggling with trauma and stress? We mentioned compassion, we mentioned this element of kindness, but are there other ways that they can access TRE remotely if they don't have you in town?
Oh, yeah. I make it free online. They can go to traumaprevention.com, click on the link, follow the exercises so they can do it. And they can get help there. There are a lot of TRE providers around the world who just give free sessions like every Friday. Just click on Zoom and join in and learn how to tremor and do it with a community.
And these providers have been trained by you.
They've all been trained, yeah. And the other thing, though, too, is that their first step is go find safety, whether that's a friend or a colleague or a family member or whatever. Even just hiding alone in your room sometimes creates safety. But safety is the first step to the resolution of trauma. So whatever your definition of safety is for you right now today, go find it. Because even when I lived in war, I could find safety in a basement. Now, it wasn't all that safe, but it felt safe. And that's a place where I could put myself to say, okay, I can breathe here. I got a little bit of safety and reduce the traumatic effects. So definitely seek out safety. But if they want to try these exercises, which I really encourage, they're absolutely free. They're available online.
I know there are certain centers as well in different parts of the world that host workshops in person as well.
Yeah, we're I think in about 80 countries around the world.
Yeah.
And you can find all of that on the website.
On the website. Okay, great. So I'll put those in the show notes for the show so everybody can go and check those out. And now coming back to you as a person, what advice would you give your younger self if you could speak to him right now?
I think I would give my younger self the advice of be curious and play with whatever happens to you in life, because there's something that you can always learn and grow from something. Even though it appears painful at first, there's still something in there about an excitement of life. We're only about 80 or 90 years on this planet. Play with those 80 or 90 years as much as you can and take it less serious than we generally tend to do.
Don't sweat the small stuff.
Yes, exactly right. Now, I'm saying this at 70 years old after I was sweating all the small stuff. So there's a little bit of wisdom there from the experience. But I do tell younger people, please go out and play more with life.
Yeah.
Enjoy it more.
Beautiful. I'm going to definitely put that in my pocket and hold it dearly every day.
Good.
And then a question I always like to ask my guests at the end of the show is, what song captures the vibration in your life in this moment?
That is so funny. But just think of that simple song, Don't Worry, Be Happy.
Bobby McFerrin.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Just that simple, beautiful, even listening to that kind of lets the body go a little bit, you know?
I feel like dancing now.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so I think that's one of the best songs to have, particularly when we're having difficulty in life. It's like that helps give you a broader perspective and helps you to learn to let go a little bit.
Oh, thank you for that gift. I collect vinyl and I've got that record at home, so I'm going to play it when I get home and have a bit of a dance.
Yes, I have that record. I play it every day, actually.
Oh, fantastic.
Just as a reminder.
Thank you. Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Berceli, for sharing your insights today. I mean, what a gift. So I really, really appreciate this moment with you in time.
Thank you so much. And I appreciated the invitation. This was lovely to speak with you.
That's it for today's show. But before we go, I wanted to leave you with a quote from the Persian poet and mystic Rumi. It says, "Everyone has been made for some particular work. The desire for that work has been put in every heart. Let yourself be silently drawn by the stronger pull of what you really love." I hope these conversations leave you feeling inspired, informed, and ready to take steps on your own unique path, which serves you best. As mentioned, do check out the links in the show notes for further information on Dr. Berceli's work and how to connect to TRE in a way that serves you best. If there's someone in your life who would benefit from this show or that it would resonate with them, please feel free to share it with them, because we're very keen to spread the word and get as many people helped as possible. And for ways to connect to me, please follow me on Instagram, but be sure to subscribe and follow the show on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Until next time, keep an open heart, your mind present, and trust that each step forward is part of your story.